So welcome everyone to the third session in this seed series with No Diabetes. Today's topic is particularly close to my heart, and for many of you who know me well, you'll know that this is something that I cherish in regard to how we practice diabetes education, and it's dealing with emotional issues around diabetes and emotional health. Today's guest is Dr Christel Hendrieckx, and Crystal and I go back a long way, but it's an absolute pleasure to have her as part of this program. Crystal is a clinical psychologist with more than 30 years' experience in diabetes. She's a researcher at the Australian Centre for Behavioural Research in Diabetes, and she basically mainly deals about the emotional side. She's the Deputy Director of the Australian Centre for Behavioural Research in Diabetes, and it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to this today, Crystal.
Hi, Anne. A pleasure to be here.
So this is such an important topic, isn't it? And it's so separate to the clinical side, the numbers that we look at, the pathology we look at, but is absolutely about how people can actually become active with their self-management, and it's around the language we use, but it's also around the emotional impact on them, on the person themselves, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Because if you think, you're so right, there's still so much emphasis on the medical side of managing diabetes, the medication you take, your lifestyle, the insulin you inject, the monitoring of your glucose levels. But when you think about it, it's the person with diabetes who is doing all the tasks at home without the support from their health professionals. And although we do know, even if you follow all the recommendations that we know are working or are recommended for diabetes management, it comes at an emotional cost. It's a big effort day in, day out for a person with diabetes.
I mean, we know a lot of people manage their diabetes without incredible emotional burden, without the burden of it, and it is relentless. We acknowledge that. There are lots of people who are doing very well. Yeah. And they have some burden, but they actually have the capacity to manage it actively still.
Yeah.
But there are some people who just can't continue to actively manage because they've actually just become so exhausted with the demands that they then experience that emotional burden.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we really need to talk about today.
Yeah, you're so right. And when you look at the research and we ask people to complete psychological measures like this diabetes distress measure, fortunately, so the good news is indeed that quite a lot of people indicate that they are coping or adjusting well to living with this condition. But also, keeping in mind, it's one time when we ask people to complete these questionnaires, it's one time point in their life. And we do know, supporting people with diabetes, that the distress and the emotional burden can go up and down. It can fluctuate over time. And how often we hear people say, oh, I have been doing quite well with my diabetes, and now suddenly I don't know what is happening, but my glucose levels are all over the place, and I really don't understand what is going on. And then, yeah, sometimes there is no reason. And that makes it so hard to understand. I'm doing exactly the same, and now my blood glucose levels are fluctuating from high up to down, and I really don't know what's happening. So the emotional burden can be quite a lot over the weeks, over the days even. And sometimes it can become quite hard to be motivated and to have the energy every day again to do all these tasks. And we know how many tasks and how many decisions a person has to take.
So, it is because, these things sometimes creep up on people, and they just don't realise that it's become such a demand that they just can't work through it. And simplest of common conversations can take place that suddenly make people realise that it's not their fault, and it normalises their experience, doesn't it? It's so important to be able to start moving in the right direction so that they get a positive experience.
Yeah, you mentioned language in the beginning, in the introduction, and I just want to, because we often talk about diabetes control, but exactly when you look at diabetes, and especially when you're managing diabetes with insulin, there are so many factors that impact on how insulin works, and they are not in your control.
No.
They are outside of your control. But in clinical care, we often put a lot of responsibility with the person with diabetes over factors that they actually can't control. Yeah. And that's we have to be well aware when we talk to people with diabetes about how they manage their diabetes, to keep that in mind and to reassure them there are things you can do, but there are many things that you can't control.
What are some of the things that people might suddenly start to say, this is me? What are some of the things that people might think, right, I think this is what I'm experiencing. I think this is me. What are some of the things that people might, apart from the broad things we've talked about, are there any sort of markers that people could say, yes, what I've seen here today is about what I'm experiencing. What do I do next? So what are some of those things that we might be able to highlight to people?
So when I was working in clinical practice and supporting people with diabetes, what I learned is that often they are not aware how their emotion can have an impact on glucose levels. Yeah. And just explaining that link, it was like the light went on for them, saying, oh, actually, yes, that's why my blood glucose levels are so high this morning, because, for example, problems with the children or conflict with partners or at work. And then they realize, oh, that's probably what has caused my glucose levels to go up. And just realizing and taking a step back and saying, oh, it's because of that I'm not getting these blood glucose levels within targets, is actually helping, because it gives you the time to sit back and say, all right, I understand why my glucose levels are so high. And instead of getting more frustrated about that high number you see on your meter, you can think, all right, it's not what I would like to see, but I understand why it's there. And it can help you finding out what you can do to avoid it, to prevent it the next time. And it's for many people, an eye-opener. And these kind of emotional stresses can go in both directions. For some people, it leads to higher glucose levels. But for others, I've heard, for example, young people who were during their exams at school or at university, that actually it reduces the stress, the exam stress reduces my glucose levels, and I must be more attentive for hypos. So it can work in two directions, and it's really helpful for a person with diabetes to, when you see an exceptional high or low number on your meter, to think, what is happening at the moment for me from an emotional perspective?
It is a very important question. So with all that conversation about what people might be experiencing, what are some of the strategies? I know that very few teams, but many do, but there are a lot of teams of diabetes care, healthcare professionals who don't have psychology access. And I know that when I've been working, how much that person has contributed to the overwhelming support that people with diabetes in my care have been given. So normalising access to a psychologist is such an important part of our conversation about this, because most people can be worried about that referral because it makes them feel like there's a mental health issue. But it's really important to normalise that referral, isn't it?
Yeah. So coming back to my own experience working as a psychologist in a diabetes specialist team, it often happened that people came to the first consultation and I asked them, what do you want to get out of it? What do you expect of today's conversation with me? And that they said, actually, it was my endo or my doctor who referred me on to you, but I don't know what I'm doing here. I have no expectations at all. But then just asking a very general, open question about what it is for you, how do you feel about managing your diabetes and living with diabetes on a daily basis. That was a conversation opener, and it gave already the person the space and the permission to just share with the psychologist the burden, the impact, the relentlessness, as we have been talking about, and just giving that opportunity is already helping for a lot of people. If they feel that their emotional struggles are acknowledged, and that we say to them, yes, we understand that this can be very hard. And as I said, I mentioned in the beginning, and sometimes, so people came to my consultations, we met for a few times because something had happened. I think of an example of a client who, on top of her diabetes, she also developed celiac disease. So that's, a double management that is required from her. But just having a few conversations about how could she deal with those two diagnoses, and how could she adjust her lifestyle and her food and her diet and all that. And after a few sessions, she said, I'm fine, I'm back on track, I can do this on my own. And that's what I often saw, that people needed some extra support for a short time, and then they were back on the road. And it could be that I didn't see them for the next 3-4 years because they were really doing well with coping and managing their diabetes. But then, as I said, something might happen, and it can be different for different people. It might be a change in your life. For example, young people going to university, that's a big change. Developing complications, hearing that you are developing diabetes complications, that can be hard to adjust again. So the journeys are very different.
Absolutely. And so if people are struggling to find the way to a psychologist, they can always go to their GP, can't they, and get a mental health referral, which gives them access under Medicare. But it's got to start somewhere. And I know how important diabetes educators are in this process, because I know how many times we've facilitated access to psychology for our people in our care with diabetes. But it's also about that diabetes educator starting to be aware and offering person-centered care, isn't it? That's also really important, isn't it? Really important.
I absolutely agree. And because we were talking about psychologists, but in my view, that's not the first point of contact. The first point of contact is the health professional who has a regular contact with the person with diabetes. Because it's people like you and the nurse educators, diabetes educators, who, because it's a chronic condition, you have regular contacts with a person with diabetes. So you know where they come from, you know what management they are on, you know where their difficulties are. So, and because this emotional side of diabetes is so intertwined with their daily management, it's people like you who really should be the first point of contact to ask that open question, to ask about, what do you find difficult about managing your diabetes? Because when you have that better understanding, you will be able as a health professional to provide that person-centered care that the person with diabetes is really looking for, because that's what they want. They want to be listened to and help them specifically with the challenges they experience.
And sometimes people go and find their care team isn't really providing that. And it's not about, unfortunately, sometimes people with diabetes have to do their own heavy lifting, don't they? They have to take some initiative, a lot of initiative that they frankly shouldn't have to take. And so, but one of the important things about a session like this is that it actually encourages people to regain that control, and that the things that they're experiencing is normal, and that they need to ask for that help. It's not a sign of weakness, and it's not a sign that they've got something else wrong with them. It's simply the fact that they're living with an incredibly relentless condition that demands everything all the time, 100%, every minute, doesn't it?
Yeah, because as a health professional, you play such an important role in reducing these negative emotions that come from living with the condition, isn't it? And if you think, as we said earlier on, there are so many factors you can't control. So why would you feel guilty then? Why would you blame yourself when your glucose levels are not in target, while you're doing your best to bring them into target? And And just as a health professional acknowledging that, look, this is what diabetes is, and the treatments, Anna, to be honest, they are not ideal at the moment. They are not perfect neither. So we have to work with what we have.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's also about making sure that my colleagues are providing non-judgmental care, isn't it? It's about making sure that you feel that if people watching this today actually think my care team, my diabetes educator doesn't do that for me, then without sort of saying, well, you need to find someone else, it's important that you get person-centered care, that you're the one that's the primary focus of that person, of your healthcare team, because it's about you. And you live with it for 8,760, what is it, hours a year? I can't remember.
Yeah. It's a lot, yeah.
A lot. And so you're living with this condition a lot of the time, and you're also making a lot of active decisions about that condition every day. And we come into your lives for a few minutes so many times a year. What we have to do is to make sure you feel confident, supported, and help you understand what's going on and normalize all the experiences you're having about living with such a tough thing.
Yeah. And also, because it's, as we said, it's so different for different people with diabetes, we also understand that for a health professional, they need to know then what it is for you specifically that makes it difficult to manage your diabetes. And so you need to tell your health professional what it means for you. For example, if you discuss with them your medication or your insulin or monitoring your blood glucose level, it's so helpful then to share with your health professional, look, I know this is what in a textbook, but that actually doesn't work for me, but it would work better in this or this way. So I would say if your health professional doesn't open that conversation that you would like to have, I would say give it a try and raise with your health professional. I understand what you say, but actually in my life, it would work out differently. It would work better if I could do it this or this way. And we do know that people with diabetes, as you said, they manage it at home. They are experts in their own diabetes. And we as health professionals, we know the guidelines, we know them well, we know what works, but that's very general. That's not for everyone the same. And so you as a person with diabetes are the one the person to share with your health professional, that's what works for me and that doesn't work for me. Can we have a conversation about that?
Most important.
And as you said, and if you have such a health professional, that's a big win for you as a health professional who listens to what your concerns are and how you see your management working at home, because that's where it's all happening. That's a big win for you. But if that doesn't happen immediately, I would say try to have that conversation. Take the leads in your consultation and say, I would like to discuss this with you today. Is that all right? Can we make some time for that?
Yes, I think that's absolutely essential advice, because people need to know that they have that permission. They need to know it's about them. And sometimes when people walk into their healthcare professional, whoever they're seeing, they suddenly feel like they've lost any, not rights, it's not the right word to say that, but they've lost that opportunity because they believe that that person's going to take over that conversation. And one of the most important things is that if the diabetes educator is talking more than you are, then the roles are the wrong way round, aren't they? It's about making sure that you're talking more than your diabetes educator, unless there's a specific answer to a question.
Yeah. I saw an interesting research, it's from a few years ago, but even people with diabetes, when they go to see their health professionals, they are really well aware how busy the health professional is. And so they will not waste their time. So they are very conscious about how that conversation will go. So because health professionals often think, when I'll start with that open questions, I will lose control over the 10 minutes consultation time I have. Well, people with diabetes are really very well aware of the precious time, and they want to make best use of the time. So that's quite interesting to see that there is that mutual understanding. I know we are both quite busy.
well, it's about two, but it's also about the professional understanding that to get maximum gain out of that session, that both parties have to be, I suppose, not empowered, that's the wrong word, but have ownership of what's going to go on there. To a degree, both parties need to. But it's also about saying to that person, you know, and I know a lot of my colleagues worry about opening up this can of worms because they don't know where it's going to go. But I know when I work, I always say to people in my care, how are you today? How are you feeling today? Is there anything you want to talk to me about before we get started? And generally, if people say, yes, I'm fine, that's fine. But if people say, oh, I'm not great, then it might not even be about diabetes today. You know, I think, you know, my colleagues also have to say, well, we mightn't have to do Diabetes 101 today because there are other things on the agenda. And unless that person has got a chance to talk that out with us, nothing's going to go further, is it, Crystal?
No, that's right. And that has been my experience as well, because as health professionals, we often have our agenda, and we know with this person today in the 10 or 15 minutes consultation, we have to talk about these topics. And it's like a bit like a tick box, is it? Yeah, we covered this, we covered that. But we do know if people feel so overwhelmed with whatever is happening in their life, our messages don't come through. And if you would ask them after the consultation, what is the conclusion of the consultation today? What is going to happen, or what needs to happen? Well, the chances are very high that a person didn't take anything away from what you as a health professional has said. And another important point I would like to make, Anne, is that the people with diabetes, they realize that you as a health professional will not be able to solve all their problems. Let's say when they have problems at home or with other personal things that are going on. But it's, as you said, it's just giving them an opportunity to share that actually it's not going well at the moment, and it's good that you are aware of that, because that will have an impact on my diabetes.
Absolutely. And look, you know, it doesn't matter if we haven't done our part, but, you know, so many people have said that to us and said that to me and said, I'm not going great, and we talk it through. And they say, I feel so much better. Yeah. Now, you mightn't have done what you wanted to do, but it's not about you. It's about, or, you know, it's about, not about the diabetes educator. It's about that person leaving that office saying, oh, look, you know, I feel better. I've talked it out with someone independent and they haven't been able to solve it, but I do feel better. Now, that does several things. They know that you've listened, and they know that while you might have had things you wanted to ask them and they wanted to tell you about their diabetes, at the end of the day, that's for another day. And they will want to come back because they know that you will focus on their needs, whatever it might be. And that's so important for us to know that we've done all that care, because the person with diabetes is a person holistically, aren't they, Crystal?
Yeah, and that's something, of course, our focus is on diabetes, and we want the best for the patient, and we do know what the consequences are when your diabetes management is really off track. But it's an important point you raise, because for many people, and I think specifically for people with type 2 diabetes, they often only get their diagnosis after they have had other health problems, you know, other health problems that for them is their priority. And when you talk to them, they said, well, actually, for me, diabetes is not my major concern, you know?
No.
And again,
sometimes it is.
Yeah, and for that conversation, it's important to know that actually there's something else on the person's mind that is for them higher on their priority list. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And we don't find that out unless we give them that opportunity.
Yeah. So I was wondering, Anna, maybe what I was thinking for people with diabetes, if before you go and see your health professional, whoever it is, the diabetes educator or your GP, to think about what you would like to talk about during the consultation, you know, and when you enter the consultation room, just ask the health professional, look, I've thought about today's consultation, and I have a few questions, or there are a few things I would like to talk with you Would that be all right? And could we spend some time? And really that sharing of agendas can be very helpful, and it might also, switch the health professionals approach, if I can call it that way, and say, yes, actually that's a good idea that I listen to what a person want to discuss and want to talk about today. So that might be a tip for people listening in today. If they feel they don't get the time or the opportunity to talk about their priorities, maybe to prepare it in advance.
Yeah, it's a very good idea, because it gives them the front foot, doesn't it? It gives them that well, they don't get a chance not to. So they, if hopefully they do get a chance to start that ball rolling themselves and take control of it.
Because I do understand, as soon as the conversation starts and the GP or the health professional takes control, it becomes harder, isn't it, to then stop that conversation and say, hey, wait a minute, I have actually another question. Yeah.
Oh, that's so important. What else do we need to talk about with this? I mean, we could talk for a long time about this issue and how important it is, but it's also, and we've talked a little bit about it, it's also really important that we find a team that's going to acknowledge us and using our language. Language is such an absolutely critical thing here. The wrong language can send the wrong message in a heartbeat and have lifelong consequences, can't it, Crystal? About the language that we use, our health professionals use sometimes, inadvertently possibly, but it can sound so judgmental to the person that it's focused on. And I just wonder whether we should spend a few minutes talking about that, because it is such an important issue.
I would just like to take the opportunity to talk a bit about research we have done where the Diabetes Smiles, maybe some people took part in that and are aware of the surveys that our research team has conducted. And we asked people an open question about what would you like your health professional to understand about your diabetes. And so the positive finding was that quite a lot of people were very satisfied with the interactions and the support they got from their health professionals. But on the other hand, quite a few people came up with that response in the way that they don't appreciate judgmental and stigmatizing. Well, they didn't use the word stigmatizing, but judgmental and discouraging language that sometimes health professionals use. And I remember one of the participants writing down that after leaving the consultation, they felt so sad for a couple of days because of the tone that a health professional talked into them. And it's such an easy way to motivate people, just to use that empowering language. It makes a night and day difference for the person when they leave the consultation room. So I would definitely say to look out for health professionals, because they are there. That's the positive news about it. There are health professionals out there who really get it and who really can have that conversation, which is helping you instead of discouraging you.
And because the other way around it is, of course, is exactly what you're saying, and that is to say, well, the simplest of messages and the simplest of choice of words can make people feel, one, less guilty about the diagnosis, two, put everything into context, rather than saying, you need to lose weight, you should have done this, you should have done that. Because people diagnosed, particularly newly diagnosed people with type 2, have an incredible amount of a credible number of things to sort of process in regard to the diagnosis, the guilt, the blame, the perception that they should have avoided this, the odd, ice cream or treat that's contributed to this. There's a lot of messages that need undoing there, and the wrong choice of language just reinforces that thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah. That's another important point you raise, and when we're thinking about type 2 diabetes and so many lifestyle aspects that are involved in that, and many people in your environment have an opinion about it. We know that, especially around food and not being active enough, these kind of comments that are really not helpful. But from the perspective of the person with diabetes, I think It's just thinking about what can I do? What am I able to do? What can I manage? Yeah.
Sustainable change. Yeah.
Yeah. And not big things, but small steps at a time. Yeah. And even if you get all the advice from your health professionals, when you come home, think about what you have discussed and think for yourself, what can I do and where will I start? And starting with small steps. And as long as you know that you are doing what you think is important and is achievable, that's an important step forward. And it might be only a little bit of what you discussed with your health professional, but that's the way forward, because if it's a big, ambitious plan, it's very hard to stick to it. But small changes and celebrate when you have achieved these small steps.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important point. Take the time to sit back, think about what is needed, what can I do, and how will I do it?
Absolutely, because the other thing too is that people already have their own self-perception, haven't they, of what that looks like.
Yeah.
And I do have occasionally people come into my office with diabetes and they say, I've been bad. And I think that's so sad to know that people have actually picked up that language and that perception about what they've done. And I say there's no such thing as bad or good in this office.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what you think has happened and let's talk that through. And of course, it's very often just a perception. And I haven't been an axe murderer down the street. It's really only a perception that they've put on themselves about what they've done or not done. And it's so sad to see that ingrained thinking. Very hard.
But we are so focused on the negative things, and as well, that's how we function. It looks like that's the way people function. But also looking, okay, maybe today there were a few things that you're not happy about. But when you look at the broader picture, I'm sure there are things you've done today that worked very well for you. And thinking about, I have been able to change this part of my lifestyle or my healthy eating or stop smoking, for example, and think about the positive experiences, because they will give you the confidence for the next change that you would like to make. So yeah, not focusing only on the things that are not working very well, but also looking at, actually, I've been doing quite well for a couple of other things that I've taken care of and that are working well for me now in my life, with my lifestyle. So not only looking at the things that are not working well, but also getting the confidence and the reassurance that there are many things going well for you as well. So that's quite important.
It is very important. I suppose we could talk about a lot of things here, but one of the things that there's a lot of things that people worry about their diabetes. They worry about complications. They worry about the things that, they mightn't be engaged well with their doctor, for instance. They might, there's a whole raft of things that drive that emotional trigger, isn't there? And I think the other thing to talk about, there are couple of ways that this can be done, is to let people know watching this today that there are measures that we can put in place. You mentioned them earlier about measures that we can use to actually measure how people are feeling and the emotional impact of diabetes on them. And these are really important tools that diabetes healthcare teams can use. Diabetes educators can use them. And they're essential tools in the toolkit for people giving person-centered care. So this is a really important thing, because then people can see what the issues are for them, and it helps to start the conversation. Do you want to talk a little bit about that specifically, about tools and how they're used?
Yeah. We are really in favor of inviting people before they come to the clinic or while they are waiting to see their health professional to complete a measure that is used to measure diabetes distress, which is everything we talked about today and all the emotional challenges that people might experience. And it can help the health professional and also the person with diabetes, just first to reflect on what are actually their difficulties. And then for the health professional, it's a good conversation starter, about it looks like, based on what you have answered, the way you have answered this questionnaire, it looks like you are struggling with this, or this is going well. Again, coming back to what is going well, but it looks like there are a few aspects with your diabetes management that are giving you some difficulties. And so that's again a very helpful tool then to have a conversation and to guide the conversation. So definitely. And just mentioning about tools, and you will see there is a link provided during this conversation to the NDSS website, because when you experience these emotional challenges, the NDSS has really very helpful what is called fact sheets about your emotional health, and it covers diabetes distress, fear of hypoglycemia, adjusting well to living to the diagnosis, also depression, anxiety. So there are a lot of really good resources out there for people with diabetes about what it is, but also what you can do about it. So where you can get support. Yeah, just want to mention that, because I think that's a very helpful resource for people who are listening today and interested in the mental health aspects of their condition.
And I would encourage people to, if this session is hitting the mark with you and that you feel you'd like to learn more about these resources are really something that I would encourage you to download and have a look at online, and take some control back. But the really big thing about this today is that this hopefully will normalise your experience and what's going on for you, and you can say to yourself, I think I need to talk to someone about my struggle. And it doesn't mean that you need to see a psychologist for the rest of your life. Like Crystal said earlier, this can mean that you might only need a few sessions to get yourself back on track, and then you're right, and then you come back to the psychologist if things go off the track. But it's a really important thing to normalise, isn't it?
I fully agree, and fully agree.
So is there anything else we need to talk about as part of this session today, Crystal?
Yeah, maybe I just wanted to come back to the early conversation, Anne, about consulting with a psychologist.
Oh, yeah.
We do know that there are not many psychologists with expertise in diabetes, and we do know that that's something that people with diabetes appreciate when they go and see a psychologist, that the psychologist has an understanding of diabetes. Now, with the pandemic and a lot of challenges came up, but the positive thing about this is that telehealth has become the norm, So from that perspective, it's now possible for you as a person with diabetes to look for a psychologist with expertise in diabetes and have a telehealth consultation. So it has actually made it more feasible to look out for a psychologist with experience in diabetes. So that's definitely something to look into.
Yes, I agree. And I know how valuable having a couple of psychologists near us, even though we're in regional Victoria, has been absolutely like gold, really. And I know how valuable it is, because not every team has access to someone who's got good diabetes knowledge and understands the issues, as well as being accessible. So yes, I think it is important for people to use the facilities that have now become so accessible to us. Thanks to COVID, the wretched virus. But I think it's really made a big and can make an enormous difference to how people access it, and it won't be hard for you to find those resources.
Yeah.
All right, I think that might be it, Crystal. Is there anything else? I think we've really talked about so many things.
Yeah.
and I do thank you very much for talking to me today. And I want to say to everyone watching this today that don't think it's hopeless, and don't think that it's something that you're doing wrong, that it could well be something that needs extra support. And don't hesitate to ask your GP or talk to your diabetes educator about asking for them to measure your diabetes, just to see if you've got diabetes distress, asking them to do these things, because Crystal and I and ACBRD, the Australian Centre for Behavioural Research in Diabetes, have done a lot of work in educating my colleagues around the importance of this issue. So they should know about it. It's something that's been at a lot of conferences. There's been a lot of education provided, and so your diabetes educator should hopefully know that the resources are there and how to find them. Would you agree, Crystal?
I would agree, and I'm quite positive for the future, and I think we are getting the messages out, and there is a mutual understanding that the psychological and emotional aspects of diabetes can't be ignored, and they play a major role in how we need to support people with diabetes.
It's just definitely not about the numbers.
No, definitely not.
Definitely not. So thank you again, Crystal, and I hope everyone watching this today has enjoyed the program, and please feel free to join in and ask questions. We're open for questions, so please feel free to do that.
Thank you, Anne.
Thanks, Crystal.
Oh, well, hello again. Right, here we go. So, can everybody, yes, I think I'm right there. So we have got one question, Crystal. We've got a couple of questions, actually. So somebody's asking, what strategies would you suggest for diabetes distress? I think that's a fairly open question. But so the question is, what strategies would you suggest for diabetes distress?
Yeah. My first question would be to reflect on what is causing diabetes distress, as we covered in the conversation, and that can be very different for each person, what is causing distress. So as I said, the first thing I would take a bit of time is what exactly in your diabetes management is giving you worries or concerns or distress. And that can be something to do with your management, your daily treatment. It can have to do with that it's hard to fit in your management into your lifestyle, or with your exercise, or not feeling understood by your environment, by your health professional. And based on what for you is causing most of the distress, that's the starting point to look for strategy. So I know it's a general question, but there are a lot of ways you can address your diabetes distress, but it's important to think about what is causing distress for me.
I hope that helps with that answer. There's another couple of questions. And who are the diabetes psychologists in the Warrnambool area? Well, I'll have to let that person know later, because there are a couple that I'd refer to. There's a couple of very good ones who know diabetes, and I'll type that answer into that person. It may not be useful for others who aren't living in Warrnambool, but I will answer that response. There's a very good mental health team at St John of God, and we use them regularly. So I would encourage you to get a referral to that mental health team up there from your GP. So I've answered that question online anyway.
And with regard to that first question, if the person who is asking that has a more specific question about, what they believe is causing the distress, I'm happy to go into a bit more detail.
Yeah, so to that person who's asking about what psychologists are in the Warrnambool area, maybe, if you've got some concerns, if you feel you want to, you can type your question more specifically, and Kristen will try and help you and answer it or guide you a little bit further. I hope that helps. There's another question here. What effect does diabetes have on dementia? Did you hear me?
Yeah, I heard you. I'm not really into this area in research, but what we do know, and that's understandable. When you have dementia, you're cognitively impaired, and diabetes requires a lot of thinking and deciding and doing things on a daily basis. So you can imagine if you start forgetting things, that diabetes will be impacted by dementia as well. So, and that can be that a person forgets to inject insulin or take their medication, or forgets going to see a doctor. So it does have a significant impact. Plus, I believe, and that's not only specific for diabetes, for a person with dementia, they will rely a lot on their environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And oh, go on.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. So I was going to say, so when the person with dementia still lives at home, if it's still possible to stay at home, the family will play an important role to help them with their diabetes management.
Yeah. And also, there's been quite a lot of work done about this, but we know that high blood glucose levels impact also on cognitive functioning. And if you've got type 1 and you have ketones, that also has an impact on cognitive functioning. And so if you've got less optimal glucose, your glucose levels are suboptimal, that will have an impact on the person's behaviour. They can become irritable if they've got high glucose levels, and that can contribute to behaviour and how they are seen by family and other professionals. So good glucose levels help to minimise some of the side effects that dementia can also have on the person.
Yeah.
There's a couple of questions there. Hang on, there's another one come through, I think. One chat, somebody said, if emotional distress caused due to diabetes lead to mental health issues like dementia, does diabetes distress cause dementia itself?
I'm not sure if I can give a
no. That's a hard question to answer, isn't it? Can I ask you? So let's extend that a little bit. Maybe this is where it's heading. I'm not quite sure whether this is the intention of that question. But if diabetes distress is not dealt with, can it lead to a form of depression, Crystal?
Yeah. That can happen, and that's why we say it's so important that we recognize as health professionals and as a person with diabetes that you have this diabetes distress, because if it's not addressed, we do know that in some cases it might evolve into depressive symptoms, and if that is then not picked up to depression. Yeah.
There's another,
but that research is only recently coming out, so but it has been shown. Yeah.
There's another question that asks, do we know to what extent stress can impact diabetes blood glucose levels?
Yeah, we do know that it's the case, and I think that's something, when you live with diabetes, that's something to do a little bit of an experiment on yourself, and measure your distress on a scale, saying from today my level is 0 or 5 with a lot of stress and 0 hardly any stress, and fill in a scale and then measure your blood glucose levels during that day and see whether you see a relationship between how distressed you are and what your blood glucose levels do. Because we did talk about, for some people stress might lead to hyperglycemia, so to higher blood glucose levels, but for other people it might lead to hypoglycemia. While for some people, it doesn't really have a big impact on blood glucose levels. So again, as for many things in diabetes, there are a lot of differences between different people. And the best thing is to observe what is the case for you and to see. And also what we also know is it depends on the kind of distress as well. It can be family conflict increasing your blood glucose levels, but for example, work distress, not really. So it's really, as I said, it's an experiment that you can do and take a note of your levels of distress during the day and look at your blood glucose levels and see whether you can see a pattern for you, because then if you see that, and then you can think about strategies to get out of that loop.
Yes, absolutely.
And also when people realize that actually that is causing their higher blood glucose levels, that's already understanding that can already help with reducing your blood glucose levels. But if you don't understand and you get more frustrated about it, that might lead to even higher glucose levels.
it helps to answer why the glucose may be elevated or that they're a bit unstable, doesn't it? It sort of gives a reason for it, and we don't always know a reason, but it helps.
And it's really good. It's a really good question, because many people don't realize that there is a link between the two, and that on some days they have levels and saying, I did exactly the same as yesterday, and look at my blood glucose levels, they are so different. And then it might be that it's their stress level that might have an impact.
Yeah. We've got another question. So if a patient is newly diagnosed, I'm not sure that this person is a person with diabetes, but they sound like they're a diabetes educator or a professional. If a patient who is newly diagnosed with type 2 diabetes is now experiencing some difficult time in life, husband passed away, any tips you would recommend when we try to provide diabetes education as she appears very stressful?
So, sorry, I might have missed the beginning. And is that just after diagnosis? Is that the question?
Yeah. So the question is, if a patient who is newly diagnosed with type 2 diabetes is now experiencing some difficult time in life, her husband just recently passed away, have you got any tips you would recommend when we try to provide diabetes education as she appears very stressful?
Yeah. So, that's a very stressful time in that person's life when her partner has just died. So probably that's something that she would like support with. So that would probably be the first thing I would check in with her. Does she has the support to go through that grief? And we know that grief can have an impact on the blood glucose level. So from a diabetes educator's perspective, I think what is very important for that person at that stage is to talk about what the person is still able, because the attention for the diabetes might get a bit in the background because the person is grieving. But what you could talk about is that you understand what this person is going through, that it is a hard time for the person, but what she still feels able to do with regard to her management, and maybe give her the permission that, yes, this is a stressful time and you might need to take a step back, but what is the minimum you still need to do to keep your diabetes on track? Because if you really let it go, then it will be much harder to work through the grief and then also to get your diabetes back on track. So it's a challenge, but I think the conversation needs to happen at both levels, diabetes, but also the grief that a person is going through.
Yes, and also if they're newly diagnosed, they're grieving for the loss of their health as well. And so it's a double dealing with a double lot of grief. And I know that people also have to take time to adjust to the diagnosis. So this person's going through an enormous amount of acceptance and dealing with the changes to her health and her life. And I think getting her some support, like you said, is going to be really important. Otherwise, I think giving her survival information is critical and trying to keep her motivated to self-care. But there is no value in having your agenda. Today you're going to do this and tomorrow you're going to do that. And next time you meet, you're going to do all these things, because unless she's receptive, you're wasting energy and she will just feel like she's getting nothing out of it. Whereas things need to be sorted out first, don't they?
Yeah, because that's an important point you make. And with regard to the diagnosis, that people should give themselves time to adjust to the diagnosis, because it's a lot to take in. And as you said, it's a chronic condition, so it will not go away with some medication or over time. So that's something to digest. And then if you get all this information about the treatment, how it looks like, and people also talk about potential complications, that's a lot of information. And I think that's something important to keep in mind when you're recently diagnosed, that you permit yourself the time to work through it. Exactly. And not everything need to be already in place in the next week, not even the next month. We know that some people need a couple of months if it's type 1 diabetes and you need to start injecting insulin and carb counting, all these things. That can take a couple of months before you have your life back on track, and that's normal, that's common.
Yeah. And I know that when I was working in the public health system, we used to bring people into give them nutrition information so they knew about healthy eating and what they needed to do, and just a really basic what is diabetes. And then we never booked them into a group education program for just exactly what you said. We didn't do that for 2 months. And by then they were already much more receptive, and there were lots of questions because they'd had a chance to adjust to it. But we never did. So we ran that every 2 months, and we never booked people in for 2 months.
Yeah, that's a very good idea, and to give them the time to take it with little steps. As I said in our conversation earlier on, it's very hard to change everything in one go. It's better to do it step by step.
Oh, absolutely. And we know that people don't retain everything, after 15 minutes. What is it, 15 minutes and it's finished, that's it.
And also what we mentioned before, and if they're so overwhelmed with emotions because they have heard that they have diabetes, they are not in a good place to listen to what you as a health professional have to say.
That's right. I think it says a lot about how sensitive we have to be, and just making sure that we are in tune with people who are going through a lot. And this lady or this person with type 2 is obviously going through a lot, a double lot of grief. So we have to be mindful of that.
Indeed, yeah.
I don't know whether there's any other questions. I just have to see. There's one question here. My partner was recently diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and constantly blames himself for being overweight, but still does nothing about it. What should I do?
Yes, your partner not doing what you would like them to do, is it?
No, that's right.
That's a hard one. We do know that it's very important that the person themselves is motivated to make changes, and you as a partner, you're in a difficult position because you're really concerned about your partner's health, and you would like them to live a healthy life and maybe change their eating habits or having a more active lifestyle. But if they are not ready for it, it's going to be difficult for you to motivate them. So I would say in this case, I think it would be good that the person has support from a health professional and have a conversation with, and maybe in this case, a psychologist, because they can help you through that process of coming to the state where you said, yes, I'm ready to do something about it. Yeah. And we do know many people are in that early phase that they say, I realize I should do something, but it's so hard, I can't do it. And they might have tried already a couple of times to lose weight and not having seen the successes that they were hoping for. So again, that's a demotivating experience. And I think that's a good place to involve a psychologist, because they can help you moving that step forward with behavioral change. But unfortunately, as a partner, I do see that you are concerned about your partner's health, but it's important that it's the person themselves makes the decision. Now it's time for me to make changes.
Yeah. Look, some people there is no timeline to how people adjust to a diagnosis like this, is there? You can't say, oh, well, it's been a week and you should be getting on with it now. It's just not that straightforward, and so many individual scenarios dominate, don't they?
Yeah. And also, and you are better placed to respond to that, but if it's type 2 diabetes, today we have quite a range of treatments which could also help with weight. Yep. So maybe in the first instance, as I said, is to talk to the health professional and see what are the options. And that in combination with support for changes, lifestyle changes, that might work.
Last question. Should I see a psychologist even if I'm not stressed about my diabetes?
It's really your decision. if you think it would be helpful, then definitely I would, yeah, why not? It can never hurt. But it's also, if you go privately and you're willing to pay the fee, then you can do it. But in other cases, you will need to have a referral from your GP. And if there is not an immediate mental health issue or emotional health issue, it might be a problem to get into, to see a psychologist. Yeah. But I must say, just as we mentioned earlier, and just having a conversation with someone about how you feel living with diabetes, and even if you say, I don't have this stress, but there is still the daily hassle of managing, thinking about all the things, the decisions you have to make with your diabetes. What we did in our clinic is that I met with all the people who were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, just to introduce myself and say, look, I'm here. Yeah. That's what you can expect from me. That's the reason why people come to see me. So just normalizing that it's part of living with the condition, that there might be times that you will feel distressed. I try to think what other reasons there might be. What also could be helpful is to discuss certain things to make it easier for you to live with diabetes, because you might sit in a routine and not think about that changing some things might make life a bit easier. But yeah, consider the costs that come with seeing a psychologist. But maybe when you're in a clinic where there is a psychologist on the team, that's definitely something to look into, whether it's part of their pathway. Yeah,
it's a very good suggestion, because I have worked in a team where seeing a psychologist was normal at diagnosis.
Yes.
And it makes a big difference if down the track, particularly families who've got a child with diabetes, it makes an enormous difference if that person later on needs to see a psychologist, because the presence of that person at the start of their living with diabetes was normalised. And it is a really important thing to think about.
Yeah, and it's done much easier afterwards to see a psychologist when you have met them early on after your diagnosis, because then it feels like it's part of your care.
Exactly. It's very important. Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, I hope you found this chat today informative. I hope you found the session informative. And thanks again, Crystal, for participating in something that is such an important topic. And we might do something along similar lines down the track, but it's been a real pleasure again. And it's been lovely to work with you again today.
Thank you, Anne. My pleasure.
No worries. Thank you. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.